Right on. So to start with, ideally, I'd like do this on a phone because that's what you'll be doing a lot of navigation on. But obviously, that's not real practical. So I'm doing it on an iPad because the ground navigation apps on iPads are more similar to phones on a desktop. So everyone just bear with me if it's not exactly perfect, but we'll do our best. So we're going to be talking about ground navigation as it relates to hike and fly racings predominantly, but obviously things you can use in other parts of your life. So some basics before we get into the kind of nitty gritty of navigating. Just wanted to, we had talked about in the athlete part or the training part, some kind of hiking and walking speeds, which I think are pretty useful. Just some numbers that we want to keep in mind are we're kind of looking for 4 miles an hour on flat ground. So that's on roads. This will become important when you're planning your route. That's with your pack and that's without running. So if you're trying to make a good clip on the road, you guys should be kind of aiming for 4 miles an hour. When it starts pitching up and the hiking poles come out and you're going to start heading up a mountain, in kind of like an ideal world, you could do 3,000 feet of gain in 90 minutes or even faster. I mean, 60 minutes is possible on a perfect like ski area type slope. That's, you know, kind of the right grade elevation, free of switchbacks, etc. But we found that 90 minutes is normally like ideal, and often 2 hours is more realistic because you might have to stop to check your phone a few times for navigation. There might be a kind of large switchback that you have to deal with. So somewhere between 90 minutes and 2 hours should be your planning guidelines for the uphill portion. And then obviously if it's, you know, not straightforward, it's, you know, longer, flatter, but you still gain the same amount of elevation, that'll take longer. If your fitness is better or poor, you can adjust from there. And then of course, heat, things like that will play a role. So keep those numbers in mind. I think they're useful as you go on to plan your next move as it relates to finding a launch in the weather, et cetera. Other kind of basics to keep in mind, and this applies almost 100% in Europe and sort of in the US, and it becomes probably 50-50 in the Western US because of the ability to, because it's desert-like. And that is trails and roads are almost always faster than trying to bushwhack a shortcut. And again, there's examples where that's not true. If you're in the Owens going up the White side and you're looking between the two switchbacks and it's just a kind of easy navigating piece of steep terrain, then yeah, go straight up. But anytime that you might be kind of veering off the trail and don't really know what's between the two switchbacks you're going to try and shortcut, it's often a pretty bad idea. Hold on. And Gavin can tell some good stories from the 2015 X-Alps when him and Aaron Derigati decided to take a shortcut, and I think they spent an extra 2 hours out there, and Aaron's feet fell off and they were both dehydrated. And it's just, if you have an obvious path and it seems like it's going to get you there, think hard about before you deviate from it.
Yeah, I would say the tendency to shortcut is often really, really strong, and it really rarely pays off. Stick with the plan.
Totally. Anyone have any questions on the kind of just that general stuff? All right. So moving on, most of the time when we're doing a race, you're going to have a list of waypoints. We do for the XRedRocks, and actually bring that up. And my first kind of just general point that I think goes without saying, but it makes a lot of sense is, you know, you've got it, study it. Trying to pre-plan every possible hike up, we tried in 2015 and figured out that was a complete waste of time. You just never really know where you're going to be. The exceptions are where there are known turn points, which is different than a waypoint. So a turn point is somewhere you must go. Waypoints are places that might be somewhere you get in the future. So at this stage, for example, you might take this Google Earth map and, you know, you might want to start really examining some of these waypoints and just getting a feel for where they are, where are they in relation to the valleys and the towns, etc. But you might not go plan specific routes. Places where that might not be true would be somewhere like here, where we have Monroe Peak, we have Cove. We all know that our home base is in Monroe for this race, and therefore the odds of us walking up to Cove or Monroe hover around near 100% at some point during this race. So might be good to go ahead and familiarize yourself with known points, or things that seem in high odds. Go ahead and plan them. Even if you change the plan later, it might already be in your phone, be something you can reference, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But you'll just know it in detail. So that's stuff that seems real obvious. You know, for some of the stuff that doesn't seem so obvious, like I have no idea what this turn point is or waypoint is out here. Again, it's good just to kind of, you know, zoom in, get a feel for the land, take a look, go, man, there's not a whole lot of roads out there. And just that way, if they come up when we give the routes, you're not completely blindsided as to what's around there. So studying over the next month is super useful, and your basic guide to study is going to be Google Earth or Fatmap, as I'll show you a little bit later. I'm liking that one as well. Got anything to add to that, Gavin?
No, I think a general familiarity is a really good idea. And you can also look at the last 2 years of what we've done. And you know, last year we had pretty bad weather, so we stayed in kind of the Monroe Valley, but the last day we went over to a totally new place for everybody. And it was completely new on the fly for everyone. So, you know, I mean, I think having a general understanding of the terrain and the options are a good thing. And I'm sure you're going to talk about this, Ben, but mostly the thing is you got to have everything offline. But I'm sure you're talking about that. So,
yep. So, and this is deviating from the ground routes, but it actually does align. You can use XContest to study previous races, especially if you start racing in other places than here. A lot of people will record and upload XContest tracks that aren't just in the air. You actually see their walking points too. So that can be super useful when you're trying to study an area. This probably goes without saying, but I'll say it anyways. When you're going to different parts of the world, make sure you're looking at the right units. You know, we fly in feet and elevation over here and miles. Makes sense. You go to Europe, makes more sense to switch to meters and kilometers, because all the maps will be referenced that way. People will talk that way, road signs, etc. So make the change when you change locations. If you're going to be in the process of having to like cut and paste locations, decimal degrees, don't use lat long. It'll melt your brain. Just kind of everyone sticks with decimal degrees. So just a little tip. So let's talk about that whole offline thing. And we're going to get to the specific apps. A lot of that depends where you are. The last 4 races I've been involved in Europe, I quit downloading things offline because the cell coverage got so good that it was a complete waste of time. Obviously, the middle of nowhere in Utah can be quite different. I would suggest that if you have a lot of time and a lot of memory, you can go ahead and try and download this whole area with enough resolution to make you happy. The other option is you wait until we give you the task and then download the area that the task covers. So you have two kind of options. Google Earth's a little goofy. It caches what you've looked at. So by zooming in and me getting this much resolution, it will retain that, and it will retain some amount of cache that, from everything I've been told, Google doesn't tell you how much that is. But if you do some zooming in over, like, let's say one of the tasks we give you, it should stay in your phone and you should be able to access it on the go. You can't deliberately download it, but it will be there. So totally worth taking your phone app on Google Earth and doing some of this right here and studying it from all kinds of different directions, and it should retain itself. It's pretty nice when you're not going to use Google Earth, and we'll get to that in a second, for the pure navigation, but you're going to use it to find launches and landings. Launches. And then it's also, sometimes it's just good reference. You can then show yourself on the Google Earth app in relation to where you think you're going. And it might give you some insights that you get lost on Gaia or Fatmap or one of the other kind of topo maps. So totally worth caching. For the other apps, Topa or Gaia, Fatmap, View Ranger, all that good stuff, you can download offline maps. What becomes tricky is to get the resolution and the layers you want. Every time you add to that, it's more memory, it's slower. And most of these apps aren't seamless. Like Gaia, you have to go pick the downloaded map to use, which can be kind of irritating. So just things to be aware of. It all needs to be done, but none of it's perfect. It's always better when you have a little cell service, for sure.
And I would say that, I mean, even this last trip to Europe, I've gotten pretty familiar with Gaia. It can be, this is not something you do the day before the race and try to figure out. When you download the maps, like Ben's saying, it's there, shows that it's there. Can't figure out how to bring it up. It's trying to use their cell coverage to bring up something else that's, it's not totally intuitive. It's an awesome program. But when you start traveling as well, it gets very complicated with, do you want to use Austria topo, France topo, Switzerland topo? They're all definitely, some of them are better than others depending on the country you're in. So, this is Monroe specific, and we could just go with, USGS in most cases. The other nice thing is we don't have a lot of trails. So it's more just looking at the terrain and figuring it out. But getting up to Cove is you just look up and start busting a nut. But I would say that, trying to have some familiarity in advance will really help. And
everything Gavin said is like totally spot on, because you're going to feel pressured when you land to be making the next move. And it's super irritating if the technology is failing you because you're not using it efficiently. So doing some practice routes, taking yourself offline, like Gavin said, so then it forces you to try and use the offline maps. All of that is what you need to do to feel comfortable when you get into these situations. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is, we're using, the first thing that technology does is it tells us where we are, as opposed to where we want to go. So as pilots, we should all be flying with some kind of navigation app. fly sky high, XC track, whatever. So we should basically know where we are. But then of course you land, it's windy, it's turbulent, whatever. You pack up, and then all of a sudden your general spatial awareness is not as good as it was. So point one on that is try in that last 2 minutes of flight to kind of take a look around. One, you might find a close launch if the conditions warrant it that you want to be heading to. And you might see the obvious road you need to get to, the easy fence crossing, the stream to avoid, the angry horses that are going to eat your wing. All of those things you want to take into account if you can that last 2 minutes. It'll pay some dividends later. In my last race, I was getting swept off the mountain in some valley wind and made a kind of a foobar. See if I can find it. Yeah, here we go. So the turn point was this B35. I'm sorry, the turn point is B36, but the way we were all flying in was you kind of stuck it on B35, tried to get tall, go over to B36. The valley wind was on the nose, super strong. So I got swept off this B35. And what I probably should have done when it was obvious it was not going to happen was just go straight across this river, land in one of these fields, and then my hike up would have been straightforward. Instead, I just fought, and then I dirted on the, as you're looking at it, right side of the river. That's the north side. And the bridge crossing and the way you then got to the trails added like an hour and a half of walking. I mean, it was just completely dumb, and I was kicking myself the whole time. And it was 90 degrees, and my supporter was lost, and there were no stores, and I was out of water. So those are all things that happen when you don't be spatially aware at the end of your flight. So enough on that, just good things to think about. So
I would add there, Ben, that a good point. And again, we're talking some about the Alps, which is different than Monroe. You know, Monroe, we don't have a lot of trails. So it's not that kind of thing, but I would very often fly in the race, switching back and forth between my flying app, you know, Fly Sky High and Gaia, and literally landing on a trail that I knew was going to the next launch. You know, I had supporters, Ben and Revis, Bruce, that were helping me with this kind of stuff, you know, and Monroe is self-supported. But again, that kind of familiarity, especially if you're going to race in the Alps, you know, things like rivers can really hose you. But also having there's a zillion trails, they're everywhere, and you can literally just land on a trail and keep going. We do that a lot in the X-Alps, and it's great.
So again, we're going to use the apps to figure out where we are. This is going to be kind of lame because I'm sitting in a town, but you know, it's what you're going to do. And so if this was Gaia and it was my phone, boom, on the arrow, you're like, okay, here I am. We're going to get to finding launches in a minute. But if we pretended that this South Sandia Peak that I'm zooming in on was our next launch, and I know where I am, this all seems self-explanatory, but that's the point, is now I know where I am. We're going to figure out where we want to go, and then we're going to move on. And I just hammered it. Don't start looking until you're damn sure you know where you are, because it's entirely possible you're 2 canyons from where you thought you were. So get that right before you start looking for a launch. So how do we find a launch? There's a lot that goes into that. I'm going to use an example that's Europe because I just did it. So I can talk through the process, and then instead of trying to make something up, kind of dumb. So that example I gave you, I hiked up to this B36. Should have been nice and windy. By the time I got there, it was kind of blowing cross, steep cliffs, tried a Cobra launch, failed, came over here and did a lee side launch. Again, late in the evening, just kind of a forward in the sheltered lee, got a decent glide, flew over here, landed in this field, and where I was going the next day was all the way over here. So that was the general route. And so I land in this field. I know that I need to go basically north, and I need to find a launch. So things that we want to start thinking about. First one's time of day. So if it's late in the day and the day is over thermically, then you're either trying to figure out where you're going for tomorrow, and that could be a morning glide or an XC start, or there's enough time left in the day that you're trying to get a hike in and another glide. If you're looking for a glide that is either morning or evening, it doesn't matter. There's a couple factors that you need to think pretty strongly about. One is if the valley or ground that you're going to be gliding over is rising as you glide towards it, you're not going to go very far. So you're going to hike uphill to fly uphill is a good way to think about it. And doesn't matter if the glide ratio is pretty good, you're not going to go very far. If the valley is falling away, it can be really advantageous. Gavin's had some morning or evening glides that they don't even make sense, like flying 40 feet off the deck for 15K because the valley is just kind of falling away. Same thing with headwind, tailwind, or the ability to maybe grab some ridges to soar. For those of you that flew in last year's X-Alps and got, or not X-Alps, XRedRocks, and got to fly that last evening, that wasn't thermically active, but it was windy. We got this massive ridge soaring session at the end, and we're able to pretty much point it on bar. So, those are what you want to be looking at. Point is, hiking uphill, wasting a lot of time to get a glide that takes you right back to where you could have walked or even shorter is not beneficial. Sorry, dog's making some noise here. And it tends to torch you more than if you can just cruise on the roads. So you want to make that calculation when you're looking at launches. If you're going to be looking for an XC launch because it's that you have enough time in the day for that to make sense, then that's everything you do as pilots. You want to be looking at the aspect, the wind, not only in terms of launch, but in terms of where you want to go, the gradient, how steep is the launch. We're going to talk about tools to figure that out. Trees, a lot of times it's easy to initially look at something, think it looks pretty good. And the more you study, you figure out you would be launching behind 20-foot tall trees and it's not going to work. And then ground cover. If you're by yourself and you're going to launch in 3-foot tall sage everywhere, you might spend 2 hours trying to get off. So those are things you want to think about as you're looking for a launch. Gavin, you want to throw anything in with that?
Well, I would just say the only thing too, what Ben said is exactly correct. And most of the time when we did this as a gamble, it didn't pay off. But Kriegel talks about all the time taking sportive risk, and there's a chance, you kick ass and you do that 1,000 meters at 7 p.m. You got to be on the ground at 9. The XRedRocks, it's earlier. I think it's 8, right, Ben? Or
I gotta look.
It's whatever sunset is, but it's earlier. But it might be. We saw Damien Lacaze do this with incredible results the last night of the X-Alps this year, where he just put it into fucking 9th gear to get up to the Col to make it, to make the last flight. And he flew, that was falling terrain. It was everything right. But I mean, he really busted a nut to get up there, and it gave him 2nd place in the X-Alps. So, I mean, there are times where it's kind of obvious like that. Hey, I can make it. I got to go. But there are other times where it's really not, where like Ben says, you got a headwind, you got rising terrain, these kind of things, but you might get one thermal and then you get another 7K, and you're also flying instead of walking on the road. And so the reward can be, you know, that's mentally, that's harder. Shit, I should have just walked, but it's kind of nice taking a flight, especially the flights that are, you know, not very scary and fun at the end of the day. And it might be like they had at XRedRocks last year. Most people just walked and then they kind of, okay, that's the end of my day. And, you know, about 10 people got in the air. And, you know, Aaron Duragati, who flies quite a bit, as you all know, said it was one of the best flights of his life. So sometimes it's worth just hauling ass and trying to make it work. You never know. You might get something might work out.
Yeah, and to that point, even last year, me and Rob actually went high and took the high line. It didn't work. The low line, if you ran, was a little faster, and like 5 people got in front of us. But that was that same thing. It was a gamble, which was, well, it was so windy. It was like, we might as well go high, because if the wind backs off, we'll be in position to launch. So then we had to find a launch, which was, of course, the interesting part. But Gavin makes a great point, and I think that's also your mentality, and you should learn yourself as a pilot. So we talked about this in our races all the time, and I've had my own self-talk. Gavin would default to getting the extra hike and flight, and someone like me late in the day would probably default to walking on the ground. So know who you are too, and go with what's going to play to your strengths and also make you happy. So everyone's a little different. So back to an example. So I landed here. We know we need to go north. It was real late in the day. I had like an hour left. So the goal with an hour is like, don't overthink it. Just start walking. So I walked down, walked up, got on this road. And by the time I got on this road and I dealt with this crossing, again, I'll show you, we'll look at maps, but the point is I didn't overthink it. I'm just trying to go towards the direction I need to go, because I only had an hour left. And once I got on a road and I didn't have to think, then I pulled out my phone and I started thinking, well, where am I going to launch in the morning? So you can see I've pointed us in the direction we need to go. There's some big mountains. I'm going to sleep at that A10 point, is about where I'm going to end the night. So there's a couple of things I could have done. I could have walked kind of northwest up that obvious valley and tried to take one of the launches over near B37. Could have covered some ground in the morning. So these are things you can think about. Let's say you have a very early start, which we don't really in the Red Rocks, but if you had a 5 a.m. start, well, you can go 4 hours before it's even sort of thermic out. So you don't always want to find the launch 4 feet from you. The race I was doing, it was a later start, and the terrain down there was lower, and there's lots of wind coming off that lake to the north. So that didn't make a lot of sense. So I looked at those big mountains in front of me and said, I should probably figure out where to launch. Talked to a local, actually stopped and kind of gave me some beta. I called Gavin, who was sitting at home working on his house, told him to take a look. And you've noticed I'm not really looking at trails yet. I'm just trying to think as a pilot. So this B25, that's a known launch. The first thing I did is I pulled out X Contest to put that launch in it, and it showed me that no one had gone anywhere XC earlier than 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So that said, that's a dumb place to go. Seems obvious. It's not really east facing. I'm going to be trying to get out of there at like 9:30 or 10, but I wanted to look anyways. So this is oriented north. You can see that these faces that I'm turning around to have some decent east to them. There's some risk. There's that big valley below you. If you blow it, it's just going to be a lot of hiking to get back to a launch, because we're going to be moving through the mountains this way. So that's that risk reward thing. But if the conditions look good, you want to put yourself in position to fly. We're here to do hike and fly racing, not hike and hiking racing. So I told myself that I should take a look here. This seemed pretty shallow, and I'm going to show you this on Fatmap. And it had this kind of weird lake with a with a flat spot, probably not the world's best thermal collector, very green, pretty easy launch, but didn't look like it'd be ideal. One of these two faces here looked to me to be more ideal. Pretty steep, might be a little technical launch, but there's some rocks below, mostly east facing, and should light off. So at that point, I've looked at it. So here's where you're going to zoom in using Google Earth. We're going to go, if we go here, there's no trees that seem like they'll get in my way. Those gray spots might be a lot of talus that could be hard to get off, and we'll be able to look a little closer or check it on Fatmap. But that seems like a possibility. And then as a backup, I kind of thought this looked pretty good. You can see I'm rotating it around. You really want to study your launches before you spend 4 hours walking up there and figure it out. You picked a really bad place to try and get off. So at that point, pulled out Fatmap again to orient you. Here we go. There's that B24. So I want to go to one of either B24 or this other one over here. So here's where Fatmap's kind of cool. You can hit gradient, boom. Okay, so you can see on the gradient map, the colors are showing us what the angle is. Above 45, it starts to get pretty spicy to launch alone. Can be done. I'd say over 55, it becomes more like a cliff launch. 45 to 55, you might want someone with you to kind of hold your wing. And ideal is going to be that kind of 20 to 40. So, you know, back when I was talking about this other side, you can say, well, that'd be an ideal launch right here. And I agree that it was all grass, 30 degrees. I didn't like it because it didn't look like it was going to generate enough lift. Come back over here. Yeah, it's pretty steep. That might not work, but I've got some 30-degree slopes here. Coming around over here. The tip's not going to work, so that's something to put in my mind. But I do have these benches that I might be able to make work, or this shoulder here. So aspect, I would look, if it's not real obvious to you, Fatmap's really good. I do believe Gaia has that layer now, and some of the other ones. I just like Fatmap, so or a gradient, not aspect, sorry. If you want to double check yourself, you can also double check the aspect using Fatmap. So due east is white. And then so anything northeast to east, southeast should be good in the morning. Again, this seems like a pretty nice place to launch. So with that information in mind, we remember that I was somewhere down in this town. So now I want to create a route and draw a route. Let's just pick there for fun. First thing you do is I just let the computer do the thinking, and then you're going to check it and see if you actually like what it's telling you. So that says 9.3 kilometers, 1,400 meters a gain, 136 meters a down. So that's what, 2,000 or 4,000 feet up. So there's not too much down. So things you want to make sure you're checking is you don't accidentally pick a route that has like almost as much down as up. That's almost never efficient. You want to check your elevations. So you know how long you think that's going to take you. You totally want to ignore both Gaia, Fatmap, all of them give you estimates of time. That's built off of a metric of like your random non-fitness enthusiasts. Like they're always way long. So just ignore that. You know, other things you can do when you're like, okay, that seems like it probably works, but let's check it. You might go back to our start point, and you You might say, well, I really want to walk down the road because I'm going to have support for that piece. And then let's try this trail. And you're going to give yourself some intermediate points. And that says same amount of gain, a little less down, about the same total distance. And I had, let's say, more support on the road before I went uphill. I might choose that. And in point of fact, that's actually the route I chose. So go ahead and play around with it. Don't just accept what they give you. Don't overthink it. Spend 5 years trying different options, but it's worth it to, for whatever reason, none of these always calculate the most efficient route. So you want to play with it and try and find one that works for you. At that point, you'd save it. You give it a name and just call it save. And then I might do that the night before. Then that morning, I'd wake up, click on that. Again, remember, we think we're on our phone. And then I'd say navigate. And it's navigating me from Albuquerque, so that's not going to work. But you guys get the idea. Let's see if I can end this navigation.
While you're doing that, Ben, what I would add too, this actually could be relevant in the XRedRocks as well as Gaia, Fatmap, most of the apps that are built for hiking, trails, running, venture running, that kind of thing. They're going to default to a trail. They're going to look from, you start A, you're going to try to get to B, they're going to take you on a trail where often it's very obvious that you should walk 10K on a road that's dead straight first before you go on a trail. This happens a lot in the Alps. And so that would be a case where Ben would send me, okay, and then it's just very simple. You go to Google Maps, put it in walking mode, and it's pretty efficient with that. And so Ben would send me 2 routes. Okay, walk on the road for 20K, then hit this trail. So, but it's a good thing to just check that you're not, because the trail thing that Gaia will do will often be incredibly inefficient. And I could see that maybe being a thing in Monroe, maybe not. There's not that many trails, so it's probably not doing that. But it's just that's another good thing to check. And like Ben said, in this case, if you can stay on a road, it's faster and it's got support, and that could be pretty relevant as well. If you're looking at something that's a quarter K difference, we'll take the road.
Yeah, and in Monroe, you might then hit the gas station that you need to resupply. So if it's going to get you the same place in about the same time, don't take the weird trail in the middle of nowhere. Totally. And Gavin's totally right. I had that note in the bottom of my notes here. Almost always, if you're going to be on pavement, use Google Maps in the walking mode. All these other programs suck because they absolutely will send you in some weird places to try and get you on the dirt because they're trying to make it fun. Once you get off, Google Maps will at times be able to navigate some very known trails, but it's not good. So do not rely on Google Maps once you get off the roads. Yeah. So that was kind of a basic. Let's look at Gaia. And let's see here. Go back over. Let's go over to, where are we here? All right, this is last year. Okay, so Gaia has layers, and we are currently on the Gaia topo. Well, we're on meters, but hold on real quick. Topo feet. So you're going to add the layers you want. Where we are, often the private land one might be useful at times. The US topo or the US Forest Service often is pretty good because it's got some detail. And then you can decide through these Zoom functions, which one you're going to use. So same thing, created a route. You can see the route down here. We're going to say, go. And then it's got all the relevant information you need. So the hike to Cove, 3,400 feet, 4.9 miles. And if you want, you can guide you. I have gotten to the point where I don't use the guide as much. I just leave it up because it'll show you moving on it, and you can, it's annoying having it try and tell you go right, go left, but that's totally an option. Let's see here. So yeah, I said there's terrain, satellite, public lands, local topos. So if you're in a foreign country, the French IGN or the Swiss topo will have data that none of these others will, that can be super useful to find you huts, etc. Launches are on certain of the newer programs, not Gaia for sure, but some of the ones that you might use in other places. So all good things to sort through the layers that might help you figure out where you want to go. Another note, I'm just trying to read my notes here, but something to keep in mind, you might get to your launch and then figure out that it's not exactly what you thought it was going to be. So in this example here, we bypassed this green knoll. Good idea. The guys who went there stood there for an hour after I'd launched and still hadn't gotten off. We had a lot of shade. So I got here. It was basically a forward off a cliff, but it was doable. Wasn't sure, so I had my dad with me. He was my supporter, but you could do this yourself if you were alone. Sent him over here to verify that I didn't want to walk over there. He called me, said, no, it's no good. I ended up launching where I was. But there's been times where we get all fixated on where we want to go and it's not working. And Gavin and I have done this where I'll stop and be like, well, let me just go walk around, and then walk back and be like, wow, we're really stupid. Like 100 feet over is a perfect launch behind a hill. So don't get fixated on where you thought you were going. When you're up there and it's the general area where you need to launch because there's nowhere else to go look around. You might find somewhere better.
The other thing I would say about that too is, specific to the XRedRocks, being in a hurry is typically really slow. So if you get your wing, it's a bunch of wind, and you try to launch in a bunch of sage and screw it up, you're going to be there for 2 hours cussing yourself trying to get your wing out, and you might do some damage as well. So, all the pro guys and girls at that level, in the X-Alps, what I see over and over again is a lot of calmness around launch and slowing down. Remember, to be fast, you got to be slow. So take your time, clear your launch. And this is just especially true in Monroe, where we don't really have very good launches. Monroe is shale and rock, super easy to cut your lines. The lower down stuff is filled with sage. Even, Cove can be tricky in certain wind conditions and that kind of thing. So, it's even a place where I would strongly consider having a little tarp that I'm carrying with me. It's something that you just kind of put your wing in a nice rosette and pop it out of there or something. So just remember to when you get in a hurry, because whatever time of day, racing, all the things that make us in a hurry, at least for me, I screw that up. You got to really force yourself to slow down.
And everything Gavin said is 100% right. I mean, it's what is it? Smooth is fast and fast is smooth. And that's the same thing as just being efficient and careful and thoughtful. So don't rush. Same goes with navigating. You go the wrong way, take a wrong street, go up the wrong drainage because you didn't stop and look at your phone. These are important things. Until you get really good at being spatially aware as you're walking through the mountains, the desert, whatever, make sure you're checking that phone screen that you think you're walking on the path that you planned on. It's pretty damn easy to find yourself not where you thought you were going and either having to backtrack, bushwhack, or make a new plan. So don't be afraid to double check. Get good at switching back and forth between the apps. Let's just say in this instance, we think we need to go to Glenwood Mountain for some reason. Well, it'd be easy if you could I use Google Earth to find it, and then it could generate a pin that I could import. That's often fairly cumbersome on a phone. So you want to, you're standing in Monroe as an example. You go, okay, well, I know that Glenwood's basically east. I've got some good reference points. Then I switch over to my other one. Go, okay, I'm in Monroe, and then go over. There it is. And then I'm going to drop myself a waypoint. Okay, save it. And then now I have this spot that I can want to navigate to. Probably won't do that because there's no trails, but let's see what it tells us. And it says, I hate you. So this is actually a pretty good example. Because there's no direct route there, and Monroe's weird, and everyone's going to have to orient themselves to that place. But there's a lot of kind of crappy little trails that go somewhere. But as an example, you might need to navigate to Cove using your other route, and then that you're going to walk up this, and you're going to go up here, and then you're going to get there, and you go, okay, well, how do I get the rest of the way up? And that's where you might switch back, be like, okay, well, here's Cove, and look, I don't need a trail like Gavin said, because I have this shoulder that I'm going to follow up. That's where these apps, especially in the Desert West, are not going to be helpful. So get really good at switching back and forth between the satellite and the topo map. Neither are going to serve you. You're going to need both. And then last plug for Fatmap in that respect that I've always liked is it does have both in one place. So you're getting the satellite view with trails. And so that can be pretty useful even back home. You guys might remember a race last year. That was our first turn point on the last day. So, again, what did this tell me? It told me there's no trails. We basically just walked through the desert all the way to this and then up this shoulder because there were no trails available. And that's good to know as well. Then you can make good decisions. You can also, if there are no trails, you can draw a straight line route, and then that'll at least tell you the elevation gain, which will give you an estimate of how long it's going to take. We've been talking for an hour. I think it's fairly basic, but hopefully was helpful. Let's do some questions.
Yeah, I always like Mitch Riley's thing and this was about flying, not necessarily navigating, but when you're flying, when you make a mistake, don't add mistakes. That's the fastest way to get on the ground, and ground navigation is the same thing. Every time I got frustrated in the races and tried to and realized, fucked up, I missed that turn. I'll just keep powering through it. I'll connect it. No, go back the 200 meters and get on the right trail. 100% of the time that I did that, I paid the price for it. So, I think you just again, don't add mistakes to ones that you've already done. And when you watch a guide, a proper ski or mountaineering guide in the backcountry, the really all good guides, they check their phone constantly. That's why they're good. They're just constantly, what aspect, where am I? Do I know exactly where I am? Am I reading this terrain right? And it's not because they're incompetent, it's because they're competent. They're constantly checking it. And that's why you get better skiing when you're with a guide, because they know exactly where they are and where they're trying to get. And we could learn a lot from watching them and paying to them. Duragati did it last year because he didn't know where he was. It's a totally new place, but he still won the race, and that's because he's doing that. Well, it's one of the reasons he won the race.
Just tried to throw my iPad on the floor. Yeah. Well, and he's a beast. He just walked 4 times faster than the rest of us, and then flew twice. So that helps.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly.
Audience, anyone have any questions?
I got one.
Shoot.
So this is gonna be my first race ever, right? And so I've never had to download a file or whatever to get the waypoints and know how to pursue it in this context, though I have used these kind of mapping tools for skiing and stuff. When I'm in the field, in the race, like, can you give me a rundown of how I'm gonna know when I've accomplished a turn point? And like, I just want kind of an idiot's version of, I show up, you say the thing, like, how do I know with confidence that I'm not going to be missing out because of a tech malfunction?
Yeah. So because it's a hike and fly race and the way these function, you're going to validate hitting a turn point, even if it's on the ground, with your flying app, not one of these hiking apps. So Fly Sky High, XC Track, that's gonna tell you that you walked into the cylinder. You can draw those. We don't provide in the race GPX cylinders for the ground. So does that make sense?
It does. And then I have a question. So my app will always try to auto turn off, it'll detect a landing, say, oh, your flight's over.
Yeah, you just turn it on.
Is there a way to disable that? Or?
Yeah. What are you flying with?
Could I like restart it if it does fail, and then that wouldn't disturb my comp file?
Well, first question, what are you flying with? The program?
I'm using the CU Navigator.
Okay, I use that as well. You can absolutely put it in hike and fly mode, and it'll stay on.
Okay, that's good enough.
And then what are we doing, Gavin? You need one continuous file. That can be your watch. That can be XC Tracer. The phone is the worst possible way to try and record a continuous track, because they always crash. I mean, you can put it in hike and fly mode and it's still going to turn itself off. So the watch works awesome, and XC Tracer or its variant is the best for a continuous track.
Yeah, and XC Tracer, I believe still needs a change to your firmware, right, Ben? Do you still need to do that, or does it just do it automatically?
You don't need the X-Alps program. There's a setting on the new stuff that works. The reason I had to buy a new one too is I had an XC Tracer 2, and it would not update anymore to a hike and fly program. So if you have the Max 2, and the 4 or newer, I believe there's a hike and fly mode. And then
or auto and fly, you just turn auto and fly off, and then it just keeps recording, right? Yeah. So for the race, you need an IGC file, which, like Ben's talking about, the continuous will work with the phone's great. I mean, your watch is great because you can just start it in the morning and you've got the whole thing. But the cylinders at turn point, especially on the ground, those are just manual. We can see it on the scoring end of things, but for you just need to zoom in, make sure you're in the cylinder. Once you're in, you don't have to worry about it. whether you're in the air or on the ground. If you're in it, you're in it. But because they're all on 1 second recording. So if you're in it, you're good. But you need to know how to use these apps. You know, if I was doing the race, I would have my Fly Sky High going all the time. It's actually what I used for following you guys around because it's just easy. I can see the cylinders. We'll send you a task file the night before or the morning of, and it'll have the cylinders. You don't even need the waypoint file. That it just has them, and it's in your thing. It's in your device, and then how, whether you get them in the air or on the ground you just need to be manually making sure you do. If you're in the air, of course, it'll just advance to the next one automatically, like you're normally flying in a comp. But if you're on the ground, you just need, okay, I'm in it, zoom way in. We've had waypoints before, where people have top landed and they have to, am I in it? And I'll be standing there. Oh, yeah, you're in it. You can look at it, you can see it, make sure you're in it. If there's any questions, we can call our scorekeeper. You can see it in real time. That you will all get a tracking device, and that makes it really easy to score and see. But it doesn't beep. It doesn't tell you if you've hit it or not.
We don't collect your IGC file unless the tracker turned off or we have a question about your track. So yeah, it's a backup, and rarely. That's not obfuscating you from making sure you're in the cylinder, but you're not. That's why even the continuous, it could fail and you'd still be fine as long as you can generally prove the question that we have that might have, if that makes any sense.
No, that helps a lot. I was just being anxious about like fumbling my app and then being disqualified because it went off and on or something in the field.
You'll be fine.
But that makes more sense if it's a backup.
Yeah, Ribs, I see you're in the chat there. You can upload to the old minis. I think Ben's talking about these days the newer ones you can just do. There's a mode you can just change the mode like in the 4s and 5s, but
the XC Tracer 2 specifically and older quit. They didn't provide any updates anymore. Like what you have is what you get. It won't do anything. Like the change log died. They quit supporting it. So you just said Mini 3 is what you put up there. The Mini 3 is still good. Older than 2 and you're going to be hosed.
I had an XC Tracer. Those of you who use the XC Tracer, it's awesome. But I had one fail on me this last trip. It was a 3, so it was a bit older in Europe because I was you got the warning from him about the charging. You have to charge it with the cable that they send it and make sure you're not just plugging it into a wall with the same adapter that you use for a laptop or something. It fries the internal electronics. I'm told that that's just because he's not making these things exactly right, that they should have their own internal protection for that, but they don't, and they don't with the new ones as well. So be really careful of that. They're expensive little pieces of equipment that you don't want to zap.
What else?
Just a website question for Fatmap. Is the website, are you able to upload batches of waypoints like we have for XRedRocks, or is it something where you have to draw one by one? Because I'm kind of struggling with that on that app.
It's the only part of that app that sucks. I have contacted the company like 4 times. I'm hoping it's going to change. Everything you just said is true. You will not batch. You can upload tracks all you want. When we give you the tasks, you'll be able to upload them. So what I suggest is study things on Google Earth with all the waypoints. And then if you like Fatmap like I do, then when we give you the specific tasks, you're only going to be putting in like 3 waypoints. And they just suck doing that. And I don't know why. I've emailed them. You should email them too. Maybe if enough people tell them they're stupid, they'll make a change.
Thanks, Bob.
There's a lot of benefit and redundancy of apps here. That makes me realize that, in the races I've done with Ben, we're definitely not relying on one thing very much. It's using a lot of different tools, and which takes time and practice, and start with one thing and get it kind of dialed. When Dave and I were in Alaska, he had I was using Gaia, and the InReach app is great in a lot of circumstances. It works terrifically. So, you download the state of Utah and it works pretty good. And he had Google Earth cached in advance, which made me always really nervous because it's just one day you open it up and the cache is gone. Revis would write a program before the race where it would scan back and forth over the whole route, and just auto cache the whole thing. He wrote a program to do this, of course, as Revis would. And that was amazing. But someday you just wake up and all your cache is gone, or you restart your phone or something. So that always made me nervous. But Dave had it on his phone for 40 days across Alaska, and it was awesome. It was amazing having that resource when we never had cell coverage the whole way, and he could just go, yeah, this looks like a great launch. He had it all cached. So it's a lot of different things that kind of come together.
I have to go cook dinner for some kids, so I'm gonna sign off, or they're gonna attack me with steak knives, I think.
Thanks, Ben. That was awesome, man. Appreciate
That was
it.
awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. We'll have this up live. Thanks to Ribs for doing those. We'll have it up live here shortly. So if you missed any of it, you can check it out. But thanks for your time, Ben. Appreciate it, man.
See you guys.
See y'all.